Pacifica, the synthesis of Anonymous Plan, Venus Project Resource Economy, and Just Naturalist secession movements. Introduction, Just Naturalism and the Emergence of Ghost Liberty. Pacifica represents a theoretical and institutional synthesis attempting to reconcile technological futurism, libertarian natural rights philosophy, and bioregional self-determination within a single coherent political framework. Rather than emerging from traditional ideological lineages such as socialism or neoliberal democracy, Pacifica arises from a convergence of three otherwise distinct movements: Anonymous 2011 strategic framework known as the Plan, Jacques Fresco's Venus Project Resource Economy, and contemporary Just Naturalist secession movements grounded in Lockean consent theory. Together these components form a political architecture centered on voluntary association, decentralized governance, and post-scarcity ecological stewardship. At the philosophical core lies just naturalism, a doctrine asserting that political authority derives exclusively from natural rights inherent to sovereign persons. These rights, life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, exist prior to government and constrain all legitimate institutions. Government therefore functions not as a sovereign entity but as an administrative instrument revocable through collective withdrawal of consent. This conception echoes classical natural law traditions while adapting them to digital transparency and decentralized technological systems. Ghost liberty, associated with Alexander Konnoff's naturalist secession thought, operationalizes these principles through bottom-up reconstruction rather than revolutionary seizure of centralized power. Its aim is dismantlement of tyranny through parallel systems, permaculture self-reliance, open-source civic coordination, and moral solarpunk architecture inspired by ecological urbanism. Instead of violent rupture, ghost liberty advances gradual replacement of coercive dependence with autonomous community capacity. This philosophy rejects federal overreach not through isolationism but through subsidiarity. Authority flows upward from counties and bioregions rather than downward from centralized bureaucracies. Historical injustices, including indigenous treaty violations and elite regulatory capture, are addressed through consensual natural law mechanisms emphasizing transparency, negotiation, and restitution rather than punitive redistribution. Pacifica therefore proposes neither utopia nor rebellion but synthesis, a civilization built upon consent verification, ecological integration, and technological abundance. The project's intellectual novelty lies in combining hacktivist epistemology, post-scarcity engineering, and natural rights constitutionalism into a single evolutionary political pathway. Anonymous Plan as revolutionary blueprint. Anonymous 2011 Plan articulated a triangular framework consisting of freedom of speech, unity and tolerance, and personal growth. While originally conceived within hacktivist culture, Pacifica interprets this triangle as a governance logic rather than merely an activist ethos. Each vertex becomes an operational requirement for a decentralized civilization. Freedom of speech functions as epistemic infrastructure. Anonymous treated unrestricted information flow as a corrective force capable of exposing corruption through viral dissemination. Pacifica expands this principle into what may be termed truth-shattering disinformation dynamics. Competing narratives circulate freely until falsifiable evidence stabilizes consensus. Rather than suppress misinformation through authority, the system relies on open verification networks and transparent auditing mechanisms. Truth emerges from adversarial openness rather than institutional gatekeeping. In governance terms, this principle becomes essential for artificial intelligence resource allocation. AI systems require accurate data inputs, censorship distorts feedback loops. Radical speech freedom therefore becomes not merely a civil liberty but a functional requirement for cybernetic governance. Anonymous insistence on anonymity further protects dissenters whose disclosures maintain systemic accountability. The second pillar, unity and tolerance, is reinterpreted as network resilience. Anonymous demonstrated that decentralized actors could cooperate without centralized leadership through shared norms and symbolic alignment. Pacifica extends this model into political pluralism capable of integrating Jeffersonian conservatives, indigenous governance traditions, ecological activists, and technological futurists within a single federation. Unity does not imply ideological homogenization. Instead, it denotes interoperability among diverse communities. Counties retain cultural autonomy while participating in shared infrastructure networks. Tolerance thus becomes structural redundancy. Diversity prevents systemic collapse by distributing decision-making across heterogeneous nodes. The third pillar, personal growth, transitions from individual self-improvement toward sustainable knowledge economies. Anonymous emphasized digital literacy and collective skill development. Pacifica institutionalizes these values through open education, cooperative innovation labs, and regenerative economic participation. Citizens evolve alongside institutions, producing adaptive governance rather than static constitutionalism. Operationally, these three pillars converge within Pacifica's transparency systems. County natural election commissions conduct open-source audits, mirroring anonymous operational practices of public verification. Governance becomes performative and observable, reducing corruption through continuous scrutiny. The triangle therefore transforms from protest symbolism into constitutional architecture. Freedom safeguards truth discovery, tolerance sustains plural networks, and growth generates adaptive capability. Together they create the informational and cultural substrate required for voluntary secession movements to function without authoritarian consolidation. The Venus Project reimagined through just naturalism. Jacques Fresco's Venus Project proposed a resource-based economy governed by scientific management and automated abundance. Critics historically argued that such systems risk technocratic authoritarianism by subordinating individual liberty to centralized planning. Pacifica addresses this critique by embedding Venus principles within just naturalist safeguards. Under this synthesis, AI-driven geodomics does not replace markets through coercion but supplements voluntary coordination mechanisms. Resource allocation algorithms operate only within counties that opt into Venus trials, ensuring consent precedes implementation. Participation remains reversible, preserving lock-in withdrawal rights. Post-scarcity infrastructure, domed cities, vertical agriculture, renewable energy grids, and automated logistics, serves the naturalist objective of minimizing coercive dependence. When survival necessities become abundant, taxation and compulsory labor lose justification. Economic participation shifts toward voluntary contribution and cooperative innovation. Pacifica's departments of goods and services exemplify this transformation. Rather than tax agencies, they function as donation-funded coordination bodies managing shared infrastructure. Individuals contribute resources voluntarily because benefits remain transparent and locally accountable. This model attempts to reconcile libertarian property rights with communal abundance. AI governance remains constrained by constitutional hierarchy. Algorithms cannot override natural rights protections, they provide recommendations subject to public audit. Open source code ensures citizens can inspect decision processes, preventing opaque technocracy. Thus Venus efficiency becomes compatible with Republican legitimacy. Environmental integration further distinguishes the Pacifica adaptation. Fresco envisioned technologically optimized cities, just naturalism insists optimization align with ecological balance and moral responsibility toward non-human life. Regenerative design, permaculture systems, and biodiversity restoration become constitutional priorities rather than optional policies. Importantly, Pacifica reframes post-scarcity not as elimination of ownership but as diversification of property forms. Personal property remains protected, while shared commons expand through voluntary association. This hybrid structure avoids collectivist coercion while enabling large-scale cooperative projects. The Venus Project therefore becomes experimental rather than doctrinal. County pilots test hypotheses regarding automation, sustainability, and governance efficiency. Failures remain localized, preventing systemic collapse. Successes diffuse organically through imitation rather than mandate. By grounding technological abundance in lock-in consent, Pacifica transforms a futurist engineering vision into a natural rights-compatible socio-economic model capable of democratic legitimacy. Evolutionary architecture, from Greenway genesis to Pacifica Federation. Pacifica's political emergence follows an evolutionary rather than revolutionary trajectory composed of three developmental stages: Greenway genesis, Cascadia expansion, and full federation. Greenway genesis begins with localized garden city enclaves emphasizing human-scale technology, renewable infrastructure, and regenerative design. These communities prioritize self-reliance through permaculture agriculture, decentralized energy production, and cooperative workshops. Governance remains informal yet participatory, cultivating civic competence necessary for autonomy. These enclaves function as proof-of-concept environments demonstrating that communities can reduce dependence on centralized systems. Economic resilience emerges through localized production networks, while cultural cohesion forms around ecological stewardship. Greenways therefore operate as training grounds for self-governance. Cascadia expansion scales this model across a bioregional framework encompassing the Pacific Northwest and adjacent territories linked by shared ecological systems. High-speed rail and digital infrastructure integrate communities while preserving local autonomy. Indigenous stewardship principles guide land management, recognizing long-standing ecological knowledge traditions. Bioregionalism replaces arbitrary political boundaries with watershed and ecosystem logic. Governance aligns with natural geography, improving environmental coordination and cultural legitimacy. Conservative rural populations associated with Jeffersonian political traditions coexist with urban ecological innovators through mutual recognition of local sovereignty. The final stage, Pacifica Federation, extends membership to broader territories including California and Hawaii under negotiated sovereignty concessions. Secession proceeds through a defined mechanism grounded in consent verification. A 5% citizen petition triggers county referendums, each county receiving one vote. Approval by 75% of participating counties results in accession, followed by a 30-day open source audit ensuring procedural integrity. Pre-existing laws remain valid unless they conflict with natural rights guarantees, preventing administrative collapse during transition. This continuity principle reduces fear associated with systemic change while allowing gradual constitutional harmonization. The evolutionary sequence demonstrates a key naturalist insight: legitimacy grows through demonstrated competence rather than ideological persuasion. Communities join Pacifica because functional systems outperform centralized alternatives, not because authority compels allegiance. Thus permaculture villages evolve into bioregional networks, which ultimately mature into a federation grounded in voluntary association and ecological coherence. Sovereign framework and indigenous integration. Pacifica's constitutional framework centers on the doctrine of sovereign persons. Individuals retain ultimate political authority, delegating limited administrative functions through revocable social contracts. Government exists solely to secure rights and coordinate shared infrastructure. Taxation is abolished in principle, replaced by voluntary funding mechanisms supporting departments of goods and services. Transparency dashboards display expenditures in real time, enabling contributors to evaluate institutional performance. Withdrawal of funding functions as a nonviolent corrective mechanism against inefficiency or abuse. Article 12 establishes indigenous sovereignty as co-equal with state authority. Tribal nations retain jurisdiction over cultural preservation, ecological stewardship, and treaty rights recognized as organic law. Historical treaty violations undergo audit processes designed to identify restitution pathways grounded in negotiation rather than coercion. Land restoration emphasizes cooperative management agreements, resource sharing, and cultural protection zones instead of compulsory expropriation. This approach attempts reconciliation between property stability and historical justice. Hawaii receives additional constitutional recognition reflecting its unique cultural and ecological status. Native communities maintain veto authority over resource exploitation and cultural disruption projects. Governance balancing principles prioritize persons, animals, and ecosystems before purely economic property interests, reflecting a naturalist hierarchy of moral consideration. Transparency mechanisms reinforce legitimacy. County natural election commissions conduct open audits accessible to all citizens. Public participation in oversight mirrors hacktivist verification practices, transforming governance into a continuously observable process. Importantly, indigenous integration is not symbolic inclusion but structural partnership. Traditional ecological knowledge informs environmental policy, while modern technological systems enhance conservation capacity. Pacifica thus frames reconciliation as collaborative governance rather than assimilation. The sovereign framework seeks equilibrium between autonomy and cooperation, ensuring no authority exists beyond consent while enabling collective action at continental scale. Philosophical implications and the testable utopia. Pacifica proposes what may be termed a testable utopia, a political system designed for incremental empirical validation rather than ideological perfection. Counties function as experimental laboratories where governance models can succeed or fail without imposing universal consequences. This approach aligns with just naturalist epistemology, which treats political legitimacy as emergent from lived outcomes rather than theoretical claims. Consent becomes measurable through participation rates and migration patterns, providing real-world feedback loops. Decentralization also redefines sovereignty. Instead of a singular national will, Pacifica recognizes overlapping layers of voluntary association. Individuals belong simultaneously to local, bioregional, and federative structures, each justified by demonstrated utility. Technological abundance challenges traditional political economy assumptions regarding scarcity as the foundation of governance. If survival resources become widely accessible, coercive institutions lose functional necessity. Political authority shifts toward coordination rather than control. Philosophically, Pacifica synthesizes libertarian individualism with ecological holism. Natural rights protect personal autonomy, while bioregional governance acknowledges humanity's embeddedness within living systems. Hacktivist transparency ensures power remains visible. Indigenous perspectives anchor long-term stewardship ethics. The result is neither anarchism nor technocracy but adaptive naturalism, a framework capable of evolving alongside technological and cultural change. Conclusion: toward a consensual post-scarcity civilization. Pacifica represents an ambitious attempt to integrate digital transparency, ecological design, and natural rights philosophy into a coherent political civilization. By synthesizing anonymous informational ethics, the Venus Project's technological abundance, and just naturalist secession principles, it proposes governance grounded in consent rather than coercion. Its evolutionary pathway, from Greenway communities to bioregional networks and ultimately federation, emphasizes demonstration over revolution. Indigenous sovereignty, voluntary economics, and open-source governance aim to heal historical injustices while preventing future concentrations of power. Whether Pacifica succeeds remains contingent upon empirical testing, yet its significance lies in reframing political imagination. Instead of choosing between centralized authority and fragmentation, it offers a third path, a consensual post-scarcity order rooted in natural law and adaptive cooperation.